Good morning, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to the first meeting, to the first webinar of this cycle, organized and proposed by CIDIS within the FA.B, Family Care for Children in Migration. It's a project financed by the EU. We are coordinating a European partnership, and we are glad to collaborate with partners from Cyprus, HOPE from Cyprus, JRS from Malta, MOP from Greece, and Porcausa from Spain, associations that already work with immigration, and as well as Italy, they are on the Mediterranean area, and they are supported by ISMO, that at international level carries out research. This project aims at promoting alternative practice to welcome young unaccompanied migrants arriving in Europe. Practices such as family fostering, welcome in a family, part-time fostering, full-time fostering, and all the forms of practice to welcome and accompany these young people to become autonomous. So a specific welcome for this kind of migrants arriving in our countries and that are in need of, they have specific needs. And we are working with this kind of target. We have this mission. Our task is to be well informed and know the specificities and the peculiarities of this presence, of the presence of minors in our country. Where did they come from? Why they arrive? How old are they? Because just knowing their needs, we can offer innovative and suitable services for their needs. Today, we will work and we will welcome a first expert, and we would like to thank her for her valuable contribution. I would like to introduce Erminia Rizzi, a legal expert working in the immigration field in 1998 in Bari. Together with a group of colleagues, they founded an association. The name is Gruppo Lavori Rifugiati. They work to orient these people in the legal framework. They work for young migrants, but for migrants generally speaking. They have a desk for foreign citizens, and she's also associate of ASGI, which is the Association on Legal Studies on Immigration. And they have been supporting and protecting the right of migrants in Italy. And today, she will introduce this cycle of webinars, and we are thankful for that. She will give us information about the main features of the presence of unaccompanied young migrants in our country, and in the countries that, as I was saying, are interested. And I'm referring to European countries, but also partner countries, Italy, Cyprus, Malta, Greece, and Spain. Because if we know the specific characteristics of their presence, we can be well informed and improve the standard of reception and the standard of the services devoted to these people. Before starting, few logistics and technical information about this morning, and the next morning we will work and learn together. Also in the future, we kindly ask you to, if you haven't already done it, we kindly ask you to rename yourself. So you can rename your Zoom account. We would like to read your name and surname. When Erminia starts speaking, we kindly ask you to mute your microphone, and whenever you want, you can use the chat. You can write so that we can transform this webinar into an interactive event. So I kindly ask you to write in the chat. Do not hesitate to write questions or observation. We will have a break at around 11, and before the end of the webinar, around 12:15, 12:20, we will read your observations, comments and questions, and there will be a brief debate thanks to your contributions. I kindly ask you and I invite you to visit the FA.B project platform, the same platform you use to register for this webinar, so that you can see the new opportunities and offers and all the projects we are developing through the FA.B project. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Alessandra De Luca and I'm the contact person for the area. Thank you, and I would like to give the floor to Erminia. You know that this webinar is available in several languages. Italian, which is the language of the floor for today, and it's the language of our speaker. But you can listen also in English, Spanish and Greek using the interpretation options offered by Zoom. Have a profitable work, and Erminia, you have the floor. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Alessandra. Thank you all for having me here and for this opportunity. Good morning, everyone. I will try to introduce this topic, which is made of many aspects and many challenges. And we are talking about unaccompanied migrants arriving in Italy or in Europe, generally speaking. The phenomenon of unaccompanied foreign minors is a very relevant issue, both in terms of quality and quantity, but I will talk about the general field of immigration. The topic is particularly complex due to the intertwining competencies and disciplines. There are many operators involved in this project in protecting unaccompanied foreign minors arriving in Italy. This phenomenon affects not only Italy, Greece or Spain or Mediterranean countries, but almost all European countries, also the northern European countries. Very often, and we will see it also later on, such countries, and I'm referring to the countries I have already mentioned, among them Italy, are not destination countries, but most often they are transit countries where these migrants arrive, but they want to leave our countries to go somewhere else. In most of the situation, they aim at regions, the northern European countries such as France, Germany, but also other countries where they can have family members relatives, or maybe they hope to find different possibilities, or at least possibilities perceived different compared to what they can find in Italy or in the Mediterranean countries. But sometimes this is just a result of false information received by minors at the moment of their departure. I will try to share some data with you because, in my opinion, they are significant. They can provide additional information about the data we have, but also the missing data are really useful. According to the data of the General Director for Immigration and Integration Policies of the Minister of Labour and Social Politics, the unaccompanied foreign minors censused on the 31st December 2021 were 12,184. Many more compared to the same number of young migrants at the end of 2020. I don't like to use the term census because I'm referring to the data of a census, but I'm not sure this is the actual number of migrants present in our countries. Most of these young people at December 2021 were male and just 17.1% female. Most of them were male, and the main countries of origin were Bangladesh, Tunisia, and Egypt. I have seen that one of the meetings we have organized was fully devoted to young migrants coming from Bangladesh, because I think that the situation of minors coming from that country is particularly interesting. And data also tell us that from 2018 to 2020 in Europe, there are 18,292 children missing. These are official figures, but according to the estimates by our association, according to our experiences, or to other data, or to other reports by the family, the total number could be much higher. I mentioned the General Directorate for Immigration and Integration Policies because it censuses the data on unaccompanied foreign minors in a database created according to Article 4 of the Prime Ministerial Decree 535/1999. The General Directorate for Immigration and Integration Policies prepares and publishes on its database on a monthly basis some statistical reports on the presence of unaccompanied foreign minors in the national territory in Italy. These are very important data, and I kindly ask you to read this data because they can give you a real picture of the trend of the flows. Now I will try to share my screen with you. I would like to share some slides taken from monthly reports, and I'm referring to the last to the report of last October. Just give me the time to share my screen.
Vedete?
Could you please confirm that you can see my screen? Can you confirm that?
Ok, perfetto, grazie. Quindi presenze dei minori
So, presence of unaccompanied foreign minors as at 31st October 2022. These are the reports received by the Minister. 18,876 minors. As you can see from the graph, the majority are males. 84.1% are male, while just 15.9% are women. But this does not mean that women are not arriving. This is just an indicator that could point out a critical point, because in the majority of the cases, and this according to the experience of our association, most of the minor girls declare to be of an age because they are victims of exploitations, labor exploitation, sexual exploitation, or exploited for other reasons. Or we are dealing with minors that would like to reach their family members somewhere else. So it is a crucial datum for what it represents, but also for what it does not represent. So it is an invitation for all of us to look at this data with greater attention. And as soon as we are in contact with girls, it is important to analyze the situation and to verify the age, especially the age declared. In the following slide, you can see the age ranges. As you can see, most of them are around 17. 43.9% of the minors arriving in Italy are almost ready for the adult age, 17 years old, and they need to be protected, but they need a prompt action. The other important aspect that should be taken into account is that there are many minors, 551 minors younger than the age of 6, and who arrives in Italy alone. I continue, and I would like to show you the list of the main countries of origin. As you can see, the first place, the first country is Ukraine. So unaccompanied minors coming from Ukraine as a consequence of the conflict. And Egypt ranks second, followed by Tunisia, Albania, and Pakistan. Once more, I kindly invite you to consider this data in a very objective way. These are data from the ministry database. For example, the presence of minors from Ukraine is not reflected in the reception system. In most of the project, for example in SAI, there are no minors coming from Ukraine. So notwithstanding this is the country with the highest percentage of arrival, this data is not reflected. Then we find Egypt, Tunisia and Albania, but all the other countries should suggest minors that are not intercepted, are not identified, or people who do not stop in Italy, who do not remain in Italy. For example, minors coming from Syria is relatively low, just 125. But I live in Puglia region, and I know that there are continuous arrivals in my regions as well as in Calabria region. We can read it on the newspapers, and most of these people are unaccompanied Syrian minors that probably don't want to remain in Italy but tends to go or to reach other countries. This is another important element. This is the graph, the same graph with a different layout, just to give you a clearer idea of the distribution. About the regions welcoming minors, the minors that have been checked are mainly concentrated in Sicily, then Lombardy, and then Calabria region, and Emilia-Romagna region ranks fourth. The other regions show a deep difference in terms of welcomed minors. The numbers from Lazio region ongoing are clearly lower. And once again, I would like to draw your attention on this. Sicily is the first country because it has been involved in this project for a long time through the route of the Mediterranean. Sicily is directly involved. There are arrivals from Tunisia, and that is the route. Many of these minors remain in the communities or are involved in the first and second reception programs of Sicily. The second region is Lombardy, and this is due to the transfer after the arrivals, but it is not only this. We should pay attention to a second route through Friuli region by land, so minors reaching Italy through what is known as Balkanic route through the border with Friuli region. They do not remain in Friuli region, but they move towards Lombardy because maybe they have reference communities, because they imagine to have more opportunities, and because from there it is much easier to move or to travel to other European states. And then we have Calabria region ranking third. Calabria is a new route that has been revived after the route and after the arrivals coming from Turkey and Lebanon. Then there is Emilia-Romagna region, always involved because it is a hot spot. So there is the Adriatic route, but also the land route. So it concentrates people coming from the land, but also people coming from the different harbors. It is important to focus on this data, and I would like to show you this slide, which shows the arrivals in Italy since the month of October. Minors identified at the moment of their arrival are 880, while those who have been traced in the Italian territory are 81, 50% and 50%. And it is quite impressive how half of the minors or half of the minors traced were traced at their arrival, and half of them directly on the territory. So we can confirm that there are different methods to arrive in Italy. We believe that the only one is by sea, so the arrival in Sicily from Tunisia and from the Mediterranean, but this is not the only one route. And we can also understand how many minors arrived in different ways through the different routes, and how many of them have never been traced. There is another interesting data about removals, people who left the country, 665 minors. And we have to consider, especially on this point, the reception system in Italy, because most of these removals are due to a family mandate. They have to go to other countries, so they follow the migratory flows and the migratory project, but many of them are also attributable to the lack of immediate support immediate safeguard because notwithstanding the many legislative modification, there are still some critical points in Italy to promptly activate a form of protection and safeguard. This number, the number of removals for us is also a challenge because all the stakeholders involved in this protection system, receptions operator, legal operator, voluntary tutors, social workers, they are involved and somehow invited to guarantee what I like to define a legal piece of information. So legal information to inform these minors about their rights in Italy, but also about the risk they may run if they go away from this country. And we should also consider the exposure to prejudice, situation of promiscuity and violence. And it is always very dangerous to reach other European countries. This is a list of the nationalities. Egypt is the first country, followed by Tunisia, Afghanistan, and it is interesting to see that the number that is still important is the arrival of Albanian minors. This is another important phenomenon because this route, the Albanian route, entails other problems. I know that you have a specific meeting about that because Albania is one of the countries that probably suffer the prejudice the most. It is a phenomenon we should consider carefully. Albania, that has become an immigration country because there are many immigrants arriving to Albania, also in transit, but it is still a country of migration, so there is a double track in Albania. Bangladesh ranks 12th, and in October we had 22 entries. Now I would like to focus on the presence of women, minor girl at 31st October 2022, and I would like to ask you to reflect on the fact that the first age range is inverted compared to the general datum because the absolute value and the percentage value concerns 14 years old girls. Most of the unaccompanied young minors are very young, while in the age range 17 years old is ranking second with a huge difference. So we pass from 1,490 unaccompanied minors to 447 minors aged 17. And I would like to remind what I was saying before, the strong presence of minors victims of trafficking. Upon indication of the traffickers, they declare to be adult, to be of an age. So, in this way, we should enhance the protection in Italy. About citizenship, we find Ukraine, Ivory Coast, Eritrea, and Albania. Special attention should be paid to the Côte d'Ivoire or Ivory Coast, especially for those dealing with trafficking, because in parallel to what we know about the victim of trafficking and coming from Nigeria, the new country where we registered the highest number of women victims of exploitation is Ivory Coast. I like starting showing the data because it is important to read them carefully, because by reading them carefully we can learn a lot, we can have many more information. They are not simply figures. I know that you have planned a meeting on the legal framework of reception, but I would like to give you some brief information about what minors find when they arrive in Italy. And I would like to start from the definition of an accompanied foreign minor. An accompanied foreign minor is a minor who does not have Italian or European Union citizenship and who is for any reason in the territory of the state or who is otherwise subject to the Italian jurisdiction without the assistance and representation of parents or other adults legally responsible for them under the laws enforced in Italy. And I'm referring to Article 2, Law 47 of 2017 that I will specify in detail later on. I would like to underline that these minor may be for any reason in the territory of the state. So the condition of an accompanied foreign minor is not correlated and as a consequence all the forms of protection. For these unaccompanied minors, the cause, the reason why they are here is not relevant. What we need to know is that there is an unaccompanied foreign minor and we are compelled to enforce all the possible protections because there aren't adults legally responsible for these minors. As I said before, there are many rules, many regulations for the rights of migrants, especially unaccompanied foreign minors. Some of them are specific regulation concerning the asylum seekers. Some of them are regulation regarding unaccompanied foreign minors, such as the Law 47 of 2017, or others are legislation concerning minor, Civil Code or Law 184 of 1983. And then there are other regulations. I would like to mention the Convention of New York for the Right of Children, ratified and enforced in Italy with the Law 176 of 1991. And it is important to remind this law because this law should be always considered for the best interest of the minor. So it must be the guiding principle for all the actions, for all the decisions and procedure we want to apply and enforce for an unaccompanied foreign minor. And all the rights provided by this regulation must be guaranteed without any kind of discrimination, regardless the nationality or the reason for the presence in this country. The Law 47 of 2017, I have already mentioned it before, it is also important because it is the first organic law that intervened by amending, even if also partially, the relevant legislation, but with a name. And the aim is strengthening protection for unaccompanied minors and guarantee and ensure the uniform enforcement of the rules throughout the national territory, because notwithstanding a plurality of rules coming from specific rules on immigration or general rules about minors, and I'm referring to the civil law 184 of 1983, we have already found incongruity or lack of compliance in the national territory. So this law guarantees the uniform application and the safeguard for all the minors. According to Law 47, the unaccompanied foreign minors have the same rights recognized recognized for the Italian minors without any kind of discrimination. We have mentioned the data. I have shown some of the official data published on the website. You can read them on the institutional website, but what I would like to underline is that the actual presence of the minors in the Italian territory is very difficult to identify and quantify because many of them are still invisible. They are not included in the statistics. They are out of this system, and so they are out of this dedicated protection system, and they are not identified. And this for several reasons. Some of them are not intercepted, so they arrived through the ghost disembarkment and not immediately intercepted, and they move away and they are alone in the territory. There are minors that are accompanied by an alleged relatives, but who may be just the exploiter or the persecutor, and I'm referring to trafficking victims. There are minors who voluntarily declare, and I use this voluntary with a bit of irony, to be of age because they receive false information by the traffickers or by the exploiters, maybe, or by the group of friends, or maybe because they have traveled in group, and most of the time in the different routes the group was an element of protection. So at the arrival they do not declare to be minor because they don't want to be separated from that group because they have a sort of protection. Or there are minors deemed to be of age, but this is due to the improper procedures to identify the age. Or there are minors who voluntarily leave the communities after their placement. And this, as I said before, happens because they want to meet with their European relatives, because they have different information provided by the exploiters or friend, or because they were not correctly informed about the procedures and they follow the information they can have in the street. This is an important point, and we as operators should work on that. We should give our contribution on that. Are there any questions, consideration? Shall I go on?
Allora, c'è una domanda.
There is a question
di Antonella Campobasso,
by Antonella Campobasso, who asks why or what is the main region for which Egypt is one of the countries from which we receive the highest number of migrants.
Qualcuno ha parlato o era... Vabbè.
Non mi hai sentito, Erminia?
Sì,
Erminia,
have you
heard the question?
Allora, io vado,
yes,
sì,
yes,
rispondo,
I can answer.
Anche, ora la parte successiva,
and
le ragioni.
I will focus on the second part. I will focus on the reasons. There are many reasons Heterogeneous are the motivation that induce people to attempt migration or impose migration. I'm talking about forced migrations. Sometimes we find the same reasons that we clearly recognize for adults because they leave a country because of a war, or a country where there is a war but nobody talk about that. We know the war in Ukraine, we know what's happening in Afghanistan, in Ukraine, as I said, but we know very little about other wars. For example, what's happening in Burkina Faso or the war in Tigray in Ethiopia. So there are many situations of war, general conflicts that involve the civil population, in particular minors, and there are countries where minors see their rights systematically violated and breached. For us, some of the rights are taken for granted, for example, going to school or expressing their opinion or access to the fundamental rights to health. Well, these rights are not present in many countries, and so young minors leave their countries for this reason. There are regions where the level of pollution is incredibly high and it imposes an environmental migration. They need to leave and to escape horrendous practices such as genital mutilation or when they are forced to enter the army, and I'm thinking of Somalia or Shabab, but there are many other examples, as well as the impossibility to freely express their opinion, their political identity, gender identity, or sexual orientation. All these are reasons inducing young people to leave their country. In particular, talking about Egypt, Egypt is not a safe country, and the level of internal repression is significant. Often, young people leave their countries to escape that repression. Unfortunately, we have an example. We are clearly involved because I'm sure you know the Regeni case, who has somehow opened a window on a corruption system existing in that country. There is a very limited expression, freedom of expression. There is a lot of discrimination. There is torture, and these are some of the reasons inducing Egyptians to leave their country. But they are not the only ones. There are religious persecution, and I'm referring to the Coptic religions. They are not Muslim, they are Christians, and they have to leave their country because they are not free to worship their religion. But especially over the in the last period, most of the Egyptians are victims of domestic violence, be it direct violence or sometimes they are just witnesses of this violence. They cannot report that condition of violence in the domestic environment, and so they are looking for an alternative. And this is quite striking because I see how these young people try to report the violence by escaping, and they try to report the violence inflicted through their mothers. In most of the time, they cannot defend themselves. They cannot ask for help because there isn't a formal but also an informal system of protection. As I said before, and I hope to have been clear enough in answering this question, I was just mentioning some of the general reasons, in particularly with reference to Egypt.
Grazie mille,
Thank you very much, Erminia.
Ci sono un altro paio di
There are a few more considerations that I would like to share with you, and then maybe we can have a break. Rosalba asks why Ukraine minors are not included in the reception system. It is an information you gave when you shared the slides about the main nationalities. So you can answer, and then I read another question. Yes. Ukrainian minors are not included in the SAI because the arrival from Ukraine has been dealt in Italy in different ways with respect to other wars or other emergencies. On the one hand, and I want to be frank, we have assisted to a form of discrimination because a differentiated treatment compared to other population arriving from other areas of war. But at the same time, this was a demonstration that a different reception is possible. So I want to focus on the positive side. And I can say that many families were available to welcome Ukrainian migrants, Ukrainian minors in their families. Or because there was a network of Ukrainian people in Italy, and this has demonstrated that the foster family promoted by Law 47 of 2017, which is not very well known, but it is a great challenge and a great opportunity for all of us. So foster families and family fostering to support the community are opportunities. So most of the Ukrainian minors are with families or with Ukrainian families in the national territory, in the domestic territory, and for this reason they are not included in the SAI, in the SAI. And the last question is a consideration rather than a question, and it is pretty interesting. Many social workers do not understand that the law does not distinguish between below or under 18 or under 14 years old. It is denied the access to the national health system, and it is denied the access to a family doctor. Yes, this is a critical point in total violation of the rules. I think that Mrs. Grimaldi is an expert, and she underlined and shared with us this critical problem. Unfortunately, we can see it in many territories. There is a difference between community and extra-community minors, and the theoretical framework of protection sometimes does not reflect what is actually enforced. But about this point, I would like to underline that it is important to focus on critical aspects, also involving local association or the GRIS, regional groups of the Italian Society of Migration, Italian Health Society of Migration. There is also a roundtable about health and migration, and there are many associations working to safeguard these minors. So it is important to underline that in some areas or in some offices there is this critical aspect. It is important. Yes, this is a crucial information for the people involved in these sectors. If there aren't other contributions or questions, let me check the chat. Yes. How the unaccompanied foreign migrants under 6 arrive in our country? Well, they arrive as well as all the other on boats, collective journeys. They arrive for different reasons. They are very young, maybe because they have lost their parents, because the parents died, or because the parents were displaced during the journey, or because they were separated from their family. In my personal experience, I can tell you that I have seen many times very young migrants, and at the departure, their mothers or fathers put on the boat the baby first or the toddler first, and then the parents was not able to on board because they were pushed away. And this is another situation that we know. And a few days ago, a 6-year-old girl arrived from Tunisia. She was brought back to Tunisia. They arrive in groups or on boats, sometimes also on foot, but usually traveling in group. Maybe when we will describe the routes in the second part of our webinars, I will give you other details about the mechanisms involving very young children. Thank you very much, Erminia. 2 considerations from Elena De Pasquale about Egyptian migrants and about domestic violence or violence they are witness of. This is true also for Tunisia. Tunisia is considered a safe country, but if this is reported by a young migrant or an adult migrant, sometimes I can see that there is a lack of sensitivity about this topic. Is it possible to have some material about the protection of these young migrants in their countries of origin? It would be very useful. And the second consideration, in the SAI where I work in Messina, we had Ukrainian migrants that had some problems in being fully integrated in the new system. Yes, I confirm this second information because I was informed about that by adults as well as by families who had some difficulties in sharing spaces and in carrying out their foster projects. About migrants coming from Tunisia, I confirm that situation, which is the same also in Egypt, with the aggravating circumstance that Tunisia is among the list of safe countries, even if it is not a safe country. And this means that there are still some hurdles and difficulties. And when there is the request of international protection, we activate an accelerated procedure. But according to my experience, I can say that a boy arrived as minors and who was retained in the CPR, in the center of reception, notwithstanding it is forbidden by the law. But in the meantime, he became of an age, he became an adult, and he presented a request of international protection. This international protection was granted and acknowledged, and we didn't talk about integration, but we know that sometimes there are difficulties in accessing our country because of the family situation. And in that case, in the case of that boy, we had an additional confirmation that domestic violence in Tunisia is a reality, confirmed also by some international association. Maria Luisa Maffetta, thanks for having mentioned SIM-RLS. It's an honor and a privilege, and we will continue to work together with you. And Maddalena Basile was dealing with the case of a minor accompanied by a woman, but this woman was not the mother, and I imagine she was referring to a Ukrainian minor. In this case, it's different. If you are referring to a Ukrainian minor, it's because in Ukraine there is a different system. Ukraine is one of the countries with the highest number of minors without the family or with a displaced family. And so there is a considerable presence of minors in the orphanages, because this is the way they call them. And to tackle this emergency, because it is an emergency, these family reception places were created. So some families are transformed into orphanages, and they can welcome these migrants instead of sending them to an institute or to a community. We had several cases of family who arrived in Italy with these children, taking care of these children because they had an order issued by the court. We have seen some problems, in particularly the attempt to avoid recognizing that foster family. But we know that there is the Convention of the Hague signed by Italy and also by Ukraine that forced, it is mandatory for Italy to recognize the procedures and the foster procedure executed in other countries, in this case in Ukraine, even without any kind of document. We had several problems with these minors, but what we have tried to do was guaranteeing a continuity. There is also another point that shouldn't be underestimated, that there is a high number of children involved in trafficking in Ukraine. So there are two possibilities: trying to welcome these young minors in communities or orphanages, or other solutions. So it is always important to consider what kind of circumstance we are facing, and of course the competent institution and the judicial authority should analyze every single case. Maddalena clarified that these minors was coming from Cameroon, but I think that, Erminia, your clarification is very useful, because especially in the last year it has been a topical issue. Yes, Alessandra, just one more a piece of information, not with reference to Capper in particular, but about what I was saying before. I can tell you that I have seen many situations with very young minors who arrived alone by themselves, because in the confusion of the departure, most of them happens during the night, the parents remain on the shore and the child was boarded alone. I would like to remind you, I would like to tell you that I have found what is called solidarity among migrants, someone who took these minors and took care of him or her once in Italy. We had some cases. Recently, a man arrived with a 5 years old boy. He's not my son, but the mother gave him to me before boarding, but then she fell in the sea, and I'm going to take care of this child. Again, there isn't an answer which is valid for every single case. We have to carry out a case by case assessment. Sometimes there are different reference profiles, reference figures. If there isn't any kind of prejudice, probably it is not the case to interrupt a relationship. Are there the conditions for which a person can keep on taking care of a child? Of course, if there are situations of prejudice or risk, we should take another action. But especially if this child was not from Ukraine but from Cameroon, and considering that this situation can be seen in different countries, and it is important to remember that there is a solidarity among migrants, but it is important to consider the possible risks. Thank you. The last comment or question, and then we will have a break. And then at the end of the webinar, there will be the possibility to ask more questions. About Egypt, I think that the main reason for which people are induced to attempt a migration is the demographic growth. Some families try to invest on the minors, and another reason may be the military service, which is long and demanding. Are there studies about it? About the military service? Yes. I have met some boys who told me that they didn't want to do the military service because it was long and because the situation, the conditions were pretty precarious. But per se, it is not a reason for international acceptance. Well, I don't agree with this interpretation, but we need to provide some more evidence. This is one of the many reasons, probably about poverty as reason to induce people to attempt migration. I didn't find data, but also the fact that we haven't recent material is an important data to consider. Thank you, Erminia. Thank you all. We can have a break, 10 minutes break, just the time for a coffee, and we meet again at 11:50 for the second part of this webinar, always with Erminia Rizzi, and the second part will be about the main routes that at the moment, or in any case recently, have been particularly popular. We know that it is a phenomenon that changes continuously, and so we meet again in 10 minutes, 11:50. Thank you.
Tra poco.
E bentrovati. Ridò subito la parola ad Erminia
Welcome back,
per la seconda
and
parte
I
del
give
webinar.
the floor to Erminia for the second part of the webinar.
Grazie Alessandra.
Thank you, Alessandra.
Allora riprendo un attimo, voglio fare solo degli accenni prima di riparlare.
Before talking about the routes, I would like to share my presentation and to give you an additional piece of information. It is important for me because it is the perfect introduction to explain what happens at their arrival. So the the prohibition of expulsion, refoulement and readmission for unaccompanied foreign minors. Article 19, paragraph 1 bis of the single text on immigration says that minors cannot be refused can be refused at the border under any circumstances. And Article 2 says that expulsion, especially of foreigners under the age of 18, is not permitted except for the right to follow the expelled parents or guardian. Already in the single text, there was this prohibition to refuse immigrants at the border. With Law 47 of 2017, the legislator sanctions an absolute prohibition on the rejection at the border of the unaccompanied foreign minors and establishes that in addition to paragraph 1 of the article, it establishes that in no case may the rejection at the border be ordered for the unaccompanied foreign minor and has to grant the resident permit to the minor, and the permit shall be valid until the minor comes of age. And this is important to tackle the critical points. And another brief information is about the identification of age. We know that some numbers are not correct because they are exceeding, and many minors are not included because for many of them it is very difficult to identify the age. Remember that there are many national rules that discipline the age assessment. Article 19 bis of Legislative Decree 142/2015, Legislative Decree 24 of 2013 about the implementation of EU Directive on preventing and combating trafficking in human beings, the decree of the President of the Council of Ministers number 234 of 2016 with reference to child victims of trafficking and the age assessment. Then there is Article 19, Legislative Decree 25 of 2008 for unaccompanied foreign migrants asking for international protection, and at the end, Article 8 of the Presidential Decree 448 of 1988 that in criminal fields concerns the approval of provisions on the criminal trial of juvenile defendants. And then there are other indications that are present in the circular of the Minister of Interior of 11 July 2007, circular of 26 November 2015, the protocol for the holistic and multidisciplinary age assessment of unaccompanied minors adopted by the Conference of Religions and Autonomous Province 2016, age assessment unaccompanied minors, Superior Health Council Opinion 2008, age assessment of unaccompanied minor and separated foreign minors in Italy, UNHCR Recommendation 2015, local protocols and multidisciplinary protocol for determining the age approved by the Unified Conference of 9 July 2020. So we have many tools to define timings for the social and health verification of age. And the law, the Zampa law, is very clear on this point because the law states that age assessment can be proposed only by the public prosecutor of the Republic of the juvenile court competent for the circumstance, and such assessment must be carried out by a multidisciplinary team, indicating always a margin of error which is more or less 2 years, and in case of doubt we have to consider that the migrant is a minor. In any case, when the public prosecutor of the Republic at the juvenile court, the age assessment is ordered and it must be carried out with a multidisciplinary approach and with a multidisciplinary team, then we need to produce a final report where the range of error must be clearly indicated. After that, there must be an order to identify the age, and such order should be sent to the interested party, and there is the possibility to make objection within 10 days. No one, law enforcement, communities, social services at the different municipalities can impose an age assessment. In case of doubt, sounded doubt, just in this case, it is important to report to the public prosecutor that can order the age assessment, and the age assessment can be carried out and must be followed by a report where the range of error must be clearly indicated. If one of these passages is not carried out properly, we can go against this tool in the most interest of the minors. And I would like to underline this point because this is crucial, especially at the moment of their arrival. Because notwithstanding the law is very clear, but also before the Zampa law, the framework, the legal framework was very clear. We always face some critical aspects, and many minors are wrongly identified as minor. Last two observations about this topic. The doubt, the sounded doubt should be valid also when a person declared to be a minor, but we have a doubt. Operators or stakeholders, we should report that to the public prosecutor. But also the opposite procedure must be valid when we are facing a person that declared to be an adult, but we have the doubt that he or she may be a minor. It is important to report it, maybe to stop possible exploitation or trafficking. So it is crucial to be in contact with the public prosecutor office, and the public prosecutor office can order an age assessment. So it is important to have the sounded doubt from both points of view. And in the meantime, while we are waiting for the age assessment, those who declare to be minors must be treated as minors, so they have to be supported by the facilities, or in case of availabilities, they can be supported by the facilities and the structures managed by the municipality. So they must have access to assistance, support and protection. Unfortunately, this is not always true. This is another critical point, but the minor identification is the crucial passage to access to the following measure of protection. A mistake, an error in this phase can compromise the whole system of protection and entail rejection or the permanence in places not suitable, maybe in places with promiscuity with adults, in the CARA, in the hotspot, or in the extraordinary reception center, or these minors can be completely excluded from the reception system and be object of prejudice, exploitation and trafficking. This is also important to understand what happens at our borders. Now I would like to focus on the routes. How do they arrive and what kind of journey do they do? Many minors arrive from African countries, from several states, from several African states, and they arrive usually in Libya. Usually Libya is one of the departure destination, and already along this pathway to reach Libya they are object of violence, treatment. They travel in groups and they are given to a trafficker. They have to pay money for being transported. The journey can last for long. So when we have a 17-year-old boy or girl, we must imagine that behind that age there is a minor who left his country maybe at 15 or 14 and who arrives in our country with specific needs correlated to a series of traumatic events he experienced all along the pathway. So we talk about pre-migratory trauma, where we can find all the reasons that induced the migration, that forced that minor to travel, to leave his or her country, but also all the migratory traumas. We know what's happening in Libya, and now it is of public domain. We know what happens. We know about the detention, the exploitation, the arrests and torture aimed at ransom, requesting money to the families that are still in the country of origin. So, regardless from the country of origin and regardless from the reasons who induced them to leave, we are dealing with people that were object of violence and tortures all along the migratory pathway. And those persons arrive in Italy and they have difficulties at the borders. For example, we are dealing with people living from Libya or Tunisia with all the difficulties you may imagine. It is impossible for them to be rescued in the sea. It is impossible for them to enter the Italian harbors. And there are difficulties also in the summary identification procedures at the arrival. And many minors, especially from certain countries, are placed in the hotspot and from there to the center to be repatriated. That it shouldn't work like that, but because they were not correctly identified. This is one of the routes, and the arrival via sea from Libya is the most popular route. But there are many other migrants departing from other African countries, but there are also other nations, Bangladesh, for example. Most of the migrants from Bangladesh arrive from Libya. Most of the minors in Bangladesh are victims of trafficking. They have a huge debt in their country of origin. They are in the hands of a trafficker. The trafficker allowed them to leave the country by plane, so the transfer to Libya was made by plane using a regular passport, regular because it was required and issued by the authority, but the data on that passport do not correspond to the real situation because they result to be adult, to be of age, but it is not true, and they also are victim of violence, exploitation, maltreatment, and then from Libya they face the last part of their journey with all the consequences that we know. When we say that the Mediterranean has been transformed into a cemetery, we are referring to all the minors, all the people who died, and we have no information about them. But we still have reporting about them. There are many Tunisian mothers asking for help, asking to trace their children, also minor children who left their country because they have no information. Some of them died, others were displaced for reasons that we don't know. This is a very noisy route. We know they depart from Libya. We know very little about other routes. For example, the route, the Balkan routes. It is a particularly complicated and demanding route because also for what we see, there are many pushback, chain pushback. So these people are arrives until the Italian border, up to the Italian border, many minors among them, but then they are rejected and pushed back, and they go back to Bosnia, where the conditions, the living conditions are traumatic because there is lack of reception. There are those known as the jungles. I've been there, and I can tell you that I've seen many minors from Afghan, from Syria, from Iraq, very, very young, traveling by themselves, and who remains in a sort of limbo for years. They remain in that route for years. They call it, and it impressed me because I'm used to work with minors, and in Italy if we see a 17 years old boy or girl, I immediately take action and I try to do something, but there the perspective is completely different. A 17 years old boy is almost an adult because we see children of 10 or 8 years old living in these jungles in promiscuity under very unfavorable weather condition with inappropriate clothes, maybe children 10, 12 years old who leaves the game together with the other. They call it the game because for them they have the impression that it's like a game. Every border rejects them and brings them back to the nearby country. And at every rejection, there is a violence because the reports by the organizations, and I'm not talking about a small association, I'm referring to reports of big organizations, declare unbelievable violences. There are videos of minors stopped, forced to remain naked and kept for hours in frozen rivers under the threat of weapons, or they travel and the only one element they have to survive is to have a mobile phone. But when they are stopped, their mobile phones are destroyed. So there is this route that involves also Italy, we had cases brought before the court, and at the border with the Friuli region, according to directive of the Public Prosecutor Office of the Court of Trieste, an order was issued, and it was possible to assess it was not possible to assess the age, and so these minors were not accepted, and that lack of access to the territory entailed severe consequences. So through Bosnia, through Croatia, through Slovenia, Serbia, Hungary, many of these migrants, many of these people, many migrants among them, arrived to Albania because that route, the Balkan route, is very harsh, very violent, and when they arrive in Albania, they remain there or they return to Greece, and they try to depart with ferry boats. Ferry boats reach Bari, Venice, Ancona, and Brindisi. They remain hidden under the trucks. Many of them dies because of that, because of the gases emissions, or because they fell off the truck and they are severely injured. Some of them, they die. So there is a massive phenomenon of this regarding this hidden pathway, hidden route, which is not mentioned, and we are talking about Syrian, Iraqi, and Afghani minors. And what happens at their arrival? Most of the time, unfortunately, on the basis of a readmission agreement that for us it is illegitimate because it didn't follow the legislative pathway. But let's suppose we want to consider it as a legitimate document, even if it isn't. There are some clauses that prevent these people to be accepted in the Greece territory. And there are many testimonies about that. Or that person is rejected and is forced to go back to Albania, an extra EU country, and so that person is rejected. For discriminatory cases, Italy was condemned by the European Court because many citizens were rejected without considering their individual situation. And on the basis of this judgment, a supervision procedure was asked by the presidents of the Council of Ministers, and the purpose is to monitor what's happening and to monitor the compliance with law. Notwithstanding this supervisory procedure, there is a continuous request to close and to cancel this procedure. We have monthly reports. We receive monthly reports compiled by several organizations, and we know that there are readmission and rejections against minors, and this is another route. I would like to mention a fourth route, and I'm referring to the arrival from the sea, from the Ionian Seas, so boats departing from Turkey or Lebanon, arriving in the south of Puglia region or in Calabria region. Most of them are Turkish, Syrian, Kurdish or Palestinian citizens, Iranian citizens as well. They depart from Turkey because they don't want to be rejected or because they have already been rejected from Greece, by Greece towards Turkey. Turkey is not a safe country. There is a very high level of internal repression, as the high number of journalists in prison in Turkey demonstrate. But because Turkey repatriate Syrian citizens and citizens from Afghanistan. So it is clear that Turkey cannot be considered a safe country. So many people decided to run the risk and to cross the sea on small boats. About these departures from Turkey, it is important to consider what is happening in Cyprus, and I'm referring to the condition of difficulties in Cyprus. Reception centers in Cyprus. May I go on? Reception centers in Cyprus have the highest percentage of requests compared to the possibilities. There are long waiting lists to enter, to be accepted in the reception centers. So many people try to leave Cyprus and to go away. There are also many boats departing from Lebanon. Of course, the severe economic condition in Lebanon is one of the main reasons that induces people to leave their countries, and this has an impact also in the refugee camps where there are the Syrians, but where there were before the war there were already other refugees from Palestine or who left Syria because of the war. So among these people, there are many minors who cannot remain in Lebanon, also because Lebanon is trying to sign agreement with Syria to repatriate some Syrian citizens on the basis of reassurances that are not plausible, and Amnesty International is reporting that because most of these people, once back in Syria, disappears. So it is important to remember that there is a new route departing from Lebanon with the boat in very precarious conditions, and this is another front, this is another war that we should consider, considering the situation in Greece, in Turkey, in Cyprus and in Syria. My feeling is that this situation will be much worse in the future. Are there questions? Time is flying, unfortunately. If you have questions, consideration, observation, feel free to share them. Thank you, Erminia. Thank you for this snapshot of the Italian regulation to protect the status of an unaccompanied migrant minor. In my personal view, it is what we should be proud of that, because in many other countries, in many other European countries that we consider better developed or more advanced in terms of social rights and human rights, the unaccompanied minors are less safeguarded, less protected compared to Italy. Not everywhere minors cannot be rejected. And so we shouldn't take it for granted. This entails consequences also to enter our country. I don't know if you want to add something about that, and then we conclude with some observation I have received in the chat. Yes, Alessandra, minors tend to leave the countries I have mentioned, not only because the conditions are miserable, but also because there isn't a system dedicated to the minors' reception. There isn't the figure of tutor. They haven't a system of protection and safeguard that they find in Italy. In Italy, the system is existing, so they go away, they go on because they are in danger if they return to their country of origin. But for them, it is not possible to remain, to stop here, because they do not have suitable forms of safeguard and protection. Of course, in this chain of violence and bad treatment, they arrive in Italy with special needs, and sometimes, and this is the challenge, the real challenge for all of us, the real challenge is to understand the specific needs, bearing in mind that we are dealing with traumatized minors with a particularly violent migratory pathway. Most of the time during the migratory pathway, they are victims of violence much more than what happened in their country of origin. What you have just said is supported also by the Association of Voluntary Tutors that is participating in this webinar. They say that in other countries there isn't the figure of voluntary tutor, as you said before. Thank you for being with us, and for sure this will be an opportunity to share contacts, activities. This webinar will be a valuable reference point. So thank you for participating. Thank you for being here with us. The Association of Voluntary Tutor of Lazio and Molise region, and I would like to add the last intervention by Maddalena Basile with reference to what you were saying, the snapshot. So thank you also for describing in details the many routes arriving in Italy. Maddalena writes about the Balkan routes. Many young from Afghanistan arrived, and then in Belgium they were victims of terrible conditions. And I totally support what you were saying before. And then a question, Antonella Campobasso asked, what is the difference between legal tutor and tutor? And you, as legal tutor, you can clarify on this point. Yes, these are two completely different institutes and concepts. The voluntary tutor, the tutor is appointed after the reform. The competence for this aspect is under the juvenile court, and the tutor is appointed when the minor is alone without adults, reference figures, or, for example, if the families are no longer legally responsible for this minor, and the tutor is provided by the civil code for all minors, not only for unaccompanied migrant minors. And it's not this figure is not necessarily the legal tutor or the lawyer. That is a person who legally represents the minor in the territory. So it can this profile can manage the assets of the minor, his property, his belonging. while the legal tutor is a lawyer, you can find the list. There is a special list of this lawyer that have this specific appointment. Well, as I was saying, the legal tutor is a profile provided by the Civil Code for all the Italian minors, for example, for the orphans, because in this way they can legally represent the minor and they can administer their property. For unaccompanied young migrant, this tutor has different function, but he or she maintains the legal representation. The tutor, the legal tutor, is appointed by the court in case of conflict of the minor with the parents or with one parent, and so he has the task to defend the child. Is a sort of trustee, guardian. He defends the child in these conditions. So the tutor and the guardian are two different profiles. And then we can conclude with the last questions by Grimaldi. I'm sure that to answer this question, probably we would need more time, but Erminia will try to answer briefly. How can you see the approach of the current Italian government when we're talking about the problem of reception, if we can define it as a problem? Actually, I don't know about the reception. What I have experienced with the stress and discomfort was the lack of immediate authorization to enter the Italian harbor, and I'm referring to ship that had rescued many minors and many vulnerable people. And I can see and I can read also declarations that are quite worrying. Before I mentioned the border with Friuli region, when there was an important judgment that condemned an episode of readmission from that border. That judgment had been suspended, has been annulled, but now I can see that this kind of approach is again the approach, unfortunately. So this makes me feel uncomfortable and worried, and I think that also due to the experience of Ukraine, we know that another kind of reception is possible. We could try to have uniform systems. We cannot legitimate parallel system, but we should guarantee a uniform, a homogeneous system, quantitatively and qualitatively, to guarantee inclusion, social justice, development of personal resources aimed at becoming autonomous. Because the lack of a welcome system or the lack of a suitable system is a problem. We won't be able to stop migration. Migration are a natural phenomenon. Man has always migrated to search for better conditions. The political instability surrounding us is another negative element. But if we stop a route, a new route will be open. If we Of course, it's like when we pour a glass of water on the floor. If we create a barrier for the water on one side, a new outlet will be open on the other side. Thank you, Erminia. I have tried to be brief. It was perfect. I totally agree with you.
Niente, ti saluto e ti
And
ringrazio
thank you for being with us. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you all for the participation to this webinar. I hope we hope to have offered you 2 interesting hours, but most of all, we hope to have created a space to improve our knowledge, to share information, because knowledge means be better at work, on our daily work, and be better at supporting migrants and also at supporting the FA.B project. I kindly ask you to feel free to share information, food for thought, observations and comments. You can use the FA.B platform, the same platform you have used to register for this webinar. We will try to do our best to answer also before the next webinars, and see you next Tuesday, 13 December, same time, 10:30 to 12:30. We will talk to Jose Carlos Cabrera Medina, who is a consultant and an expert in migratory policies. He is from Spain. He is also a cultural mediator, expert in unaccompanied foreign minors. He will talk about migrants coming from Morocco and Algeria, especially to the coast of Andalusia in Spain. He's also a radio speaker, and this is a very interesting experience because he's managing a program and a podcast on Channel 2 Radio. You can listen to this podcast if you want to know something before the next webinar. So thank you for participating, and thank you all. Thank you, Erminia.
Un saluto a tutte e tutti.
Thank you all.